Stop first, then only later it's okay.
Saying something like
No, it's correct.
okay. So what are we going to do now? I think we can start.
Can start.
I think can over.
Ready, start.
Yeah, one link now.
Start. Please start.
One link now.
Start. Start now. No, not yet, not yet. Don't start, don't start.
You muted.
Eh?
Anybody else not taking a seat? Are they all taking a seat? Huh?
Tell us when we can go live.
Yeah, we can go live now.
We're starting now.
Yeah, we're starting now. Is it? Oh, okay, go. Okay, I think you can start. No problem. Just press the on button. Hi, a very good morning to everybody. It's so nice to see a full room of like living human beings. Firstly, thank you for gracing this occasion. We deliberately made this particular event hybrid because the very first report that we released in 2020, everything was done virtually. So I think the professionals here who did the report for us, they might also want to get some hard knock questions directly. So all of you have been invited here to ask them some questions as well. So, but good morning and welcome to Space. My name is Nicole. In case you didn't know, I am the pink head co-founder of the Food Bank Singapore. Some of you would have identified. So we're very proud to say that finally, we have gotten the second report of our hunger report. So just to share with you, in your little brochure, right? You know how intense the debate was, whether green bowl, empty bowl, or because the last one had broccoli, right? Or should we fill it up with rice? So aesthetically, we were thinking very deep because we felt that the empty bowl symbolizes something. There's still a gap in the system. There's a lot of gaps in the ecosystem where collaboratively, whether it's with government agencies, whether it's with academics, corporates, NGOs like ourselves, we can possibly fill up the bowl. Okay, so I wanted to start today's conversation by sharing that. But without further ado, today we have a very important gentleman who's here with us because today we have the Tolerant Foundation that has supported the Hunger Report. So can you please give Mr. Sergeant Aswani a round of applause? And we will just do a very simple check presentation. My dear brother has abandoned me for a food show in Vegas, so I'm going to currently host and receive money also at the same time. Thank you. Yes, sir, over here. Yeah. Priska, is this okay? Yeah, can. Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you. Mavis, thank you. Okay. I think on a more somber note, right? Firstly, I really wanted to thank all the stars aligned. You know, we've been debating on this date of the event. Also, and we were just so happy that it's today and it wasn't yesterday. Because if it was yesterday, we'll be clashing with PM's announcement. And I don't think any of them would be here. All of you, all the media would just cancel on us and say, no, there's much bigger announcements happening. So we're very happy that it is held today on a Friday. Okay, so that's one. So jokes aside, I think the last 2 over years has not been easy for the world, for all of us, for Singapore as a nation. And I think over the last 2 years, the Food Bank has also learned in depth a lot of issues on the ground. Actually, COVID opened our eyes a lot more. In 2020, for the first time, the Food Bank team went door to door. And during that 4 to 5 months, during the first few difficult months, we actually served out more than 1 million meals door to door. But it's not the numbers that was staggering. It was the data and the reflections that we received. So one of the reflections that I wanted to share before we start today's conversation and why this report is so important, our team usually comes back and shares stories. During those very difficult months, we were likely the only person that person living in the house saw for that particular day, for that particular week, for example. And sometimes the aunties will say, hey, James, talk to me longer lah. Why you really have to run away? Because you've got so many meals to serve. But that also made us realize that actually food is beyond just filling your tummies. It is very important from an emotional standpoint and a mental well-being standpoint as well. So actually, as a first world country like Singapore, we really need to focus on emphasizing on choice, which later the 2 professionals will share with you what our report has found. But secondly, also is about feeding better. With good nutrition, we are actually able to live better and it will drastically change lives as well. So without further ado, I won't steal the limelight. With the 2 ladies, let me welcome Delvin and Tanya. Over to you. Yeah, go ahead.
A very good morning to everyone here physically, as well as our audience virtually. So we are very excited today to be able to present and launch our latest research on food insecurity in the local context. So some of you might be wondering, how did this report come about, right? So in 2019, the Lien Center for Social Innovation was commissioned by the Food Bank Singapore to embark on a nationally representative study, right, to really look at what is the prevalence of food insecurity in the local context. So we launched the Hunger Report 2020 during the thick of the pandemic. So what are some of the key takeaways from the Hunger Report? The first key takeaway is that 10.4% of Singaporeans actually experienced some form of food insecurity in the last 12 months. The second, previous slide, please. So the second key takeaway from the original Hunger Report is that there is a misalignment in the food services that is given to households. And why? We found that it's because of dietary restrictions, cultural mismatches, or sometimes it's about the inability of the recipients to be able to convert the type of support that's given to them into consumable food. And that's because of mobility issues or their inability to cook. Right? So what happened after the data collection of the hunger report in 2019? COVID struck. So lockdowns became very common. And in our local context, we had the circuit breaker, right? So in 2021, what we did was to embark on the hunger report to really just focus on food insecure individuals in Singapore. So can we go back one slide, please? One more. Yeah. So what do we mean by food insecurity? When we talk about food insecurity, really it is about when a household does not have or is not confident of having physical or economic access to sufficient and acceptable food for a healthy life. So we really want to press the point that the absence of hunger is really not a sign of food security. Okay? So the objective of this current piece of research is to build on the two key takeaways that we found from our original report. So this study is conducted in two phases. Okay, so the first phase really is what we wanted to do is to really study the impact of COVID-19 on food insecure households. We were able to do that, and we were in a position to do that because we had already collected pre-pandemic data. Okay. The second thing we wanted to do really was to put into an action recommendations that we ourselves have put in the original hunger report, and that is to meet the unique needs of each food insecure household. And we attempted to do that for this study through an intervention. So next slide. So myself will be going through with you phase one of the study, where I will be taking you through what is the impact of COVID-19 on food insecurity, and my colleague Tanya will be going through with you phase two. So for phase one of the study, what was our methodology? To be able to ascertain what is the impact of COVID-19, we had to go back to the households that we had identified as food insecure in 2019. So we had 145 of such households from the hunger report. We contacted all 145 participants, of which 40.7% of them agreed to participate in the study. So we had a sample size of 59. Next slide. So in terms of survey instrument, to be able to ascertain, the changes pre-pandemic and current, we had to use the same survey instruments, right? So to classify and measure food insecurity, we use the HFSSM, which is the Household Food Security Survey module. Then we also wanted to determine what are some of the changes in their psychological well-being. So again, we administered the Kessler Psychological Distress Scale. So what did we find? What were some of our findings, right? So here what I will do is to present to you the broad strokes in terms of the changes in the classification, right? Good news first, 44.1% of our households registered some form of improvement in their food security classification. So what do we mean by some form of improvement? This basically means that they were able to move up at least one category, right? So at least from severely food insecure in 2019 to now moderately food insecure, because that's an improvement, or moderately food insecure to now food insecure. And we have also families who moved from severely food insecure up two categories to food secure, right? So you might wonder, how did previously identified food insecure households go from food insecure to now food secure? And they did the same survey instrument. We do chart some possible reasons based on their responses to the surveys into our full report. So I do urge you to download our full report. The second piece of good news is when we analyze the proportions of the households in each of the statuses. What we found here is that 20.3% of households are now food secure. And you will remember that when we recruited them for the study, our whole sample was actually identified as food insecure in 2019. But now we have 20.3% who have been classified as food secure using the same survey instrument. Okay, and that is good news, right? So again, to be able to ascertain what are some of the reasons that has helped them move up 2 categories, I do urge you to download the full report. So now we come to the bad news, right? So unfortunately, 10.2% of our households worsened in their food security status. So this basically means that they had moved from moderately food insecure in 2019 to now severely food insecure. We also have 45.8% who registered no change. So they remain status quo in 2019 pre-pandemic times versus now. The second finding that we really wanted to present is the availability of food support. So a large majority of our food insecure households are still not receiving any form of food support. So that's 71%. But when we also look at the same 59 households in 2019 versus now, there is a slight increase in the percentage of households that are receiving food support. So it's very small, from 25.5 in 2019 to 28.8 in 2021. Okay, so now I'll pass the mic on to my colleague Tanya, who will be going through with you phase 2 about our intervention.
Thank you, Dalvin. Sure. Thank you, Dalvin, so much. So yeah, so I think what Dalvin shared with you was the phase 1 of the study. But as she also mentioned earlier, we also conducted the study in 2 phases. In the second phase, what we were really interested in knowing was, is there a possibility for us to work on some of the recommendations that we had put forth in the 2020 report? And one of the main recommendations that we had made back then was that there was a misalignment in the food support services that were food support that was being rendered to food insecure families. Not only was there duplication, not only was the fact that many severely food insecure families were not receiving support, but even with those who were receiving support, there was a misalignment. Like what Dalvin just mentioned, either there was a cultural mismatch, either there was the food that was being given was incongruent with the needs of the family. If I give dry rations to a lonely couple, elderly couple, or a lonely uncle who's living alone, it would defeat its purpose. But that was happening, right? Some of their dietary restrictions were also not being taken into account. So we reckoned that each family came with its own unique challenges around food. And we needed to ensure that how can we meet those challenges? And because we had this fertile ground over here, we had these 57 food insecure families who we thought we could do a sort of a pilot, right? So what did we do in order to provide these families with that support that they needed? We developed what we called the needs toolkit. Now you might ask, what is this needs toolkit? It's nothing but a simple 5 to 7 minute survey that any food support organization or a caseworker can conduct even over the telephone. That's how we conducted it, which will give the caseworker or the food support organization a very accurate assessment of the food needs and preferences of the family. It asked them questions about their food preferences, whether there were children in the household, what were their food support preferences? Do they prefer vouchers? Do they prefer fresh produce? Do they prefer cooked meals? So we asked that. And then some household information, right? So what was your household size? How much money do you spend on food per month? And so on and so forth. So once we gained this information from the families, we used this information to design what we call our intervention. Next slide, please. So this is what we did in our intervention. We offered these families 2 months of support, either in the form of Ntuc vouchers or in the form of cooked meals. Only 36 families of the 57 actually participated in phase 2. And out of those 36 families, 34 chose Ntuc vouchers and only 2 families chose cooked meals. So this support was given to them for a period of 2 months. And of course, we didn't want to stop there. We wanted to know whether this sort of targeted support that we thought was very congruent with the needs and preferences of the family was actually making a difference or not. So what we did next was we wanted to estimate the efficacy of this intervention. Next slide, please. So as you can see in this graph, there were families that were These were all families that were food insecure at pre-intervention, but after they received the 2-month worth of support, 23.5% of the households who were previously assessed to be food insecure were now assessed to be food secure. We were very encouraged by this finding. While the percentage might seem low, I mean, this was only 8 families out of the total of 36 who had actually moved a grade. So many severely food insecure families had now become food secure, and and I think about 2 moderately food insecure families had now become food secure. What we also found is that if you do an overall analysis, a statistical analysis of there being any significant difference between their food insecurity status pre versus post-intervention, we did find evidence for a statistically significant difference, and the effect size was pretty large. Let's move ahead to the next slide, please. What we also found was that their psychological well-being had also improved statistically significantly over this 2-month period. We also wanted to know whether these individuals were satisfied with the support that was rendered to them, right? That would be the biggest quality control for us. And we were humbled to know that 75.8% were extremely satisfied, and the remaining 24.2% was somewhat satisfied. What you don't see on this slide, but what you can find in the report, is the fact that 15% of these food insecure families had actually reported being extremely dissatisfied before the intervention took place, right? So we can see that the satisfaction levels of the families also were catapulted in a very big way, and that was very gratifying for us as a team. Next slide, please. All right. So what we also had an opportunity to do was to actually see the spending trends of the Ntuc vouchers that were dispersed to the families. All right. So we had asked the families to maintain receipts, and about 90.4% of the families maintained receipts in the first month, and about 82% of the families returned receipts to us from the second month. And we did an analysis of the kind of purchases they made over this period, and we found that 78.3% of the total amount was actually spent on buying food items. But there was a substantial 18.6% that was spent on non-food products, mainly on toiletries and cleaning products. And then there was a smaller 3.1% of the receipts that we could not even identify what those items of purchase were. Either the receipts were faded, or there were acronyms used on the receipts that we could not identify those products. But what was also important for us to note is that when we compared the food purchases that were made by our sample against the household expenditure survey that was done by the Department of Statistics in 2018, the categories were very, very similar. So we were rest assured that the vouchers were well utilized on products that the family actually needed. In fact, the top 4 categories of food items that our participants brought, which were meat, bread and cereals, milk, cheese, eggs, and fish and seafood, were completely in line with the HES, that is the household expenditure survey that was conducted to know the expenses of an average Singaporean. So they were quite in line with one another. So this was really just the gist of our phase 1 and our phase 2, why we took this 2-pronged approach, and why we wanted to show that when we do give autonomy to our beneficiaries, it goes a long way in lifting them from food insecurity to food security, and also enhancing their sense of satisfaction with it. So I'm going to hand over back to Dalvin to just share 2 very small recommendations that we also make in this report.
So based on the findings of the report, we are putting forth 2 recommendations for action on the ground, hopefully. So the first is that there is a need for autonomy in Singapore's food support model. So what our findings in our study show is that it is really important to meet the unique needs of every food insecure household. Every household is different, right? And as Tanya presented, there is so much of value in providing food insecure households with autonomy. So in the context of our study, our our participants were first empowered to make decisions on the type of food support that they receive. Do they want to receive supermarket vouchers, or are there other type of food support that is more appropriate for their household? For those who chose supermarket vouchers, they then had the freedom to decide the products to purchase that is most pertinent in their household, right? So our approach actually did two things. First, we were able to meet the food needs of food insecure households appropriately. And secondly, we afforded them a sense of dignity and ownership. Why? Because they could make purchasing decisions, for example, of products that is most required by their household. The second recommendation that we're putting forth really is partnerships that are needed in the food support ecosystem. And this is based on our analysis of the receipts of those who chose the supermarket voucher. And as Tanya shared, 18.6% of spending was actually to non-food items, right, such as toiletries and cleaning products. So food support organizations on the ground may find it very challenging to meet such a wide array of support that is required by food insecure households. So there is value in organizations coming together, rallying their resources together so that we can meet the real needs of food insecure households and provide them with holistic and targeted support. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Delvin and Tanya. Okay, since we have you on the stage, right? Okay, maybe before we proceed to the panel discussion, is there anything specific that you may like to ask? So maybe as a get-go, right? Some of you must be wondering, how come so few households? Okay, because this time we actually decided to give them money and help. So the food bank was actually paying for all these vouchers as well. So I think if there was $1 million, I think we would have expanded the reach a lot more. And the second thing was that getting these surveys done is not so simple. It took a lot of time, sometimes to convince the households to unveil actually how their spendings were. And of course, some of them spent on things like cigarettes and all that as well, which was also important for us to know how they spend. So, but some of them were also quite shy to share and reveal some of the information. So surveying these seemed like limited families took a lot of time. So if we had the luxury of like a 2-year window, no war, no COVID, for example, I think we would have taken our time to deep dive into this space even further. But the food bank's mandate to the Lian Center's team was that we wanted to come up with some very simple statistics to deep dive into the 2020 report, so that we know from 2022 onwards, what should the food bank be doing so that we actually execute great help on the ground and not just like raise funds blindly. So I just wanted to clear the air because some of you must be wondering. So versus the first report that we did was more than 1,000 families, right? This was more of a qualitative research. And I think the findings were very in line with some of the programs that we already have in place, which I will share. But any questions from anybody over here regarding the report? Yeah, I failed my statistics, so some of them. Yes. The demographic of the.
So if you would like to look at the demographic breakdown of our sample, that can be found in our report. But how we sampled this specific study is that we went back to our parent sample in the original hunger report. Why? Because we already have their baseline data, right? And we want to be able to make comparisons between 2 time points, right? So we had to go back to only the participants that we had identified and classified as food insecure in the original report. And from there, we only have 145 participants.
Yeah. Okay, maybe just to elaborate and refresh everybody's memory, if you're not sure what the earlier report stood for, the earlier list of participants in the very first report was actually, the guidance was given by MSF. North, South, East, West, demographically, racially, religiously. So it was an equal mixed bag of people all around the island. So we just went back to the same pool of people and just asked, just picked these families, right? Yeah, so, but it's all from, the diversification was actually guided by MSF in the earlier report. Yeah.
And I think this is the strength of the current report, because in the original hunger report, we had randomly sampled the sampling frame, and we ensured that it is nationally representative, as Nicole said, in terms of where the households were living, geographical location, housing type, ethnicity. We weighted all of these demographics. So to be able to pull a sub data from that population frame, I think it's a strength of this report.
Yes, yes, Christian.
So this is actually a limitation of our study, because for this specific study, we wanted to focus on previously identified food insecure individuals, because we already have baseline data. What we are not able to ascertain is whether or not those that were previously identified as food secure, how have their situation changed with the pandemic? And it could be very possible that they have now become food insecure.
So maybe just to add on this as an answer, right? So that's why over the last 24 months, the food bank has been reached directly by social workers and different agencies that we were not serving earlier on. And I think they themselves, the social workers and the family service centers, have been receiving a lot of more walk-in requests, so to say, especially for food aid. Traditionally, not from the pool of people that you think would need help. And I think today's panel discussion, we might be able to shed some light as well, because I think we can't do it as one charity. We might need to do it collectively as a nation to identify this. So the other question that sometimes the media will ask is that how you go around helping. And so one rule of thumb is very simple. Look out for your neighbor, look out for your teammate, look out for anybody that works in your team, because hunger has no face. From the people that we have served during phase 1, trust me, I have seen homes with 5 plasma TVs. And you wouldn't even think that this person actually needed food, because I think they could have just sold off some TVs or something and made ends meet. But that really showed the situation on the ground, because they were suddenly displaced, suddenly jobless, and suddenly found themselves just laden with debt. And in the gig economy, which is something that we observed, which is important, a lot of the couples, husband and wife, like they can be a freelance designer, for example, and the husband might be either running his own like Grab business or something like that, suddenly jobless. Yeah, it was the people that had full-time jobs that were still covered, because thanks to the government, we were given subsidies to pay everybody's salaries. But the people that were kind of more in the freelance economy, the initial stages was very tough for them. Yeah, because they rely on the projects and the ad hoc jobs that they got. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. So just stemming from what you just mentioned about, identifying people who might need this kind of support, how would the channel of communications be? Would you actually recommend people like us to talk to other people directly, or would you actually recommend us to just identify and reach out to the organization, and then the organization would reach out to them? So
yeah, so for all the audience here today, and for anybody listening in on Zoom as well, the food bank opens our doors. Anytime you can send us an email, call our hotline, leave a WhatsApp message. We will be able to redirect the needy person or the underprivileged to the right sources of help. Because a lot of times, food is just is symbolic of what they're suffering from. They might need many other forms of help, medical, studies, whatever else. So usually what we do is we work very closely with MSF and all the various family service centers, for example. If this gentleman is living at this block, at this area, we will try to hand over the case to the centers closest first to analyze. Yeah, and then, but usually also what we do, which the team has been doing, is that we usually give them an emergency food aid bundle, like to tie them through, right? Maybe their cupboards are completely empty, but that's what we have done. Thankfully, the emergency food aid has tapered off this year and last year actually, but in 2020, it was a scary state of affairs. Like we've got people calling like, my neighbors seem like 3 days, no food. Can you please send the meals over? Yeah, so it was an eye-opener for us. Yeah. Welcome. Any other questions? I feel like I'm part of the Lian Center. Like, I'm just not so smart. Any other questions? If not, thank you. Yes, ladies, you can take your seat. Okay, I'm gonna shift a little bit logistically because today's a sunny day. Yeah, I think we can. I'm going to sit here. Yeah. Yeah, I thought we can we move this a little bit so that the audience also won't get, we don't need this anymore later, right? Okay, we don't need this? Okay. Because, yes, fine, no problem. Thank you, thank you. This is Eric's seat. If not, he's going to be baked in the sun. He's already been baking in the sun. Yeah. We're just going to mix it up a little bit. Yeah, so we all, yeah. Hey, it's okay, Edward. It's fine. I'll sit on the high chair. Yeah, I'll sit on the high chair. Thank you, dear. Thank you. Come. Yeah, come. It's okay. I'll just sit here. We'll shift over here. Okay, so thank you, everybody, for your patience. Thank you. It really gives me immense pleasure. Today, we have a very mixed group of people that will be joining us here, other than myself. So firstly, we have Mr. Eric Chua. He is the Parliamentary Secretary for Ministry of Social and Family Development. Eric, maybe you can take a seat here. Yeah, no problem. Yes, if not, chow tai, Okay, and next up, a very close and dear friend as well, MP Edward Chia. He's a member of Parliament for Tsenghua Ward and Holland Bukit Timah GRC. So we'll put all the gentlemen to one side. And on behalf of Tolerum, we have the head of communications, Ms. Priska Hu. And next we have Dr. Tanya. She's the senior lecturer at the Human Development Nathan School of SUSS. Okay. And last but not least, we've got Delvin. She's the program manager at Lien Center for Social Innovation. Yeah, so I think we can leave it there. It's fine. Yeah, we can leave it there. Okay, so we are amongst friends today, and I think all of us have a passion for this topic, which that's why all of you are here. Any questions that you may have, please feel free to raise up your hand or just to ask, and I'll facilitate, not a problem. So, but today, my first question is to Eric. Since we have him, let's address the elephant in the room. A lot of people have often thought that Singapore's government is great. They look after every aspect, right? So how far do you think the government has come in acknowledging and seeking out the gaps, and possibly how can grassroots, corporates, NGOs come together in supporting these gaps as well? What is your view?
Well, first of all, thanks very much, Nicole, for having me back here in this very cool and swanky space in this industrial estate. Very happy to be here, and thanks for the love this morning, shielding me away from the sun when I thought actually I could do some suntan at the same time. Yeah, so very happy to be back here. And actually, as I was listening through the presentation just now by Delvin, as well as Tanya, I was very, very heartened. I was very glad. If I can go back to what Nicole just said earlier as well, the government taking care of every aspect, I think that's probably too large a claim. We try our best to, address issues that we might have in society, and food insecurity is one of them. And maybe I can just, if you just allow me a couple of minutes to just zoom out, 10,000 feet above,
sure,
and really address the larger issue of what food insecurity really stems from. And I think food insecurity is oftentimes a presenting issue. It's symptomatic of deeper-seated, deeper-rooted issues that we find in families. Nicole mentioned just now that, in families that have got food insecurity issues, it could well be family disputes, it could well be employment issues, it could well be mental health issues, many other, it could also be a complex web of issues that each of these families face. So, but food security presents itself as one of those symptoms that sometimes the challenges that each of these families face are. So what happens is that I think, how then do we respond to such a situation? I think in terms of delivering social services today, we are taking an approach where we understand the problem for each family is complex, and the solution that we want to really deliver to each family is going to be, as much as possible, bespoke and customized and personalized as well. If you could allow me to just quote a few examples. So who are the groups of people that could potentially be suffering from food insecurity issues? So you talk about rental households, I think. And I think that's one big part of the equation that we want to look at and address head on. Recently, in 2019, we've piloted ComLink. ComLink is short for Community Link. We have piloted that in 4 sites across Singapore. Essentially, if you can just put it in a nutshell, I'm mindful of time, it is our effort to really reach out to rental flat families to try to help them break the cycle of poverty, the cycle of abuse, the cycle of substance abuse that they face within the family. And really our focus is on the next generation, on the children, on the youth, on the youngsters, so that hopefully by the time it is their time, right, they can break out of the poverty cycle, they can break out of the situation they're in, they can elevate themselves out from rental flat families. So that's one way we are looking at it. And how we essentially try to do it is, we know oftentimes people complain about, wow, how if we apply for A, it's going to be so difficult. I go to agency A, agency B, agency C, so on and so forth. So we're trying to reduce the bandwidth tax that each of these families actually experience. And through ComLink, we want to deliver a whole suite of government services, if you will, plus what our community partners, great partners like Food Bank actually offers, on the same table, on the same plate, so that the family doesn't have to go scuttling around from agency to community partner to agency again, just to make sure that the family has a complete suite of assistance that they need. So I think that's the tone and that's the tenor of social service delivery today in a nutshell. So that's ComLink, and that's rental flat families. There are also smaller groups of people or friends within our community that might need help from time to time with food security issues. One group of them, we call them in MSF, the vulnerable in the communities, right? What do I mean? I mean our tissue paper sellers. We see a number of them in the hawker centers. I mean our cardboard collectors. They often try to be invisible, but we do see them. Oftentimes they are seniors, they are older. Again, they have complex issues. And these really form the group that we call the vulnerable ones in the community. What we do, we work with community partners who go around befriending them, because one important point that Nicole and our researchers mentioned earlier as well is many of them, if you meet them for the first time, for the second time, for a few times in a month, they won't be telling you their whole life story. So without really understanding their specific circumstances, it's going to be hard for us to really help them on issues such as food security. So that's why we tap on community partners, because sometimes non-government phase is probably one that's less intimidating. And we befriend them. So it's a journey, it's a relationship that we have with each of them vicariously through our befrienders. And we want to understand the situation, and behind the befrienders will be the government agencies extending help where we can. So that's the VIC. And we actually have a network, we call it the VIC network, Vulnerable in Community Network. So that's the other part. One last, maybe not last, but third part that I want to talk about, actually amongst our midst in Singapore, you might think that Singapore is first world, swanky, little red dot. We don't have the problem of homelessness, but we do. We do have rough sleepers in the midst. And we say rough sleepers because I think it better reflects the nature of the problem. Not all the homeless people in Singapore are homeless. Some of them have homes to go to, but for various reasons, such as family disputes, they can't get home. I've met this uncle who was at one point rough sleeping in a restaurant at Bugis Junction. Sometimes I join our community partners for night walks. So we extend, and we start from 11 p.m. at night, and we go engage some of these rough sleepers. And he told me, actually, he's in his 60s. He actually has full-time employment. He works in a supermarket as a packer. So he's got a decent job, earns a decent income. But he had a house to go back to a few years ago. But when his late mom passed away, that's when he and his sister, the dispute really just went to a point where the sister said, right, you just get out of the household. And that's where he started having all these problems of, having no place to call home when he actually had a home to go back to before. So rough sleeping is another issue that we probably want to look at, because this is another group that possibly faces the issue of food insecurity as well. And again, We work with a network of partners. So I think the many helping hands approach, as you can see now, is really one of the key feature of us delivering social services from the government's viewpoint. And the network is called Partners Engaging and Empowering Rough Sleepers, or peers in short. So these are just some of the higher level macroscopic view of how we treat the issue of social inequality or poverty, of common social issues in Singapore. So, but zooming down to the specific issue of food security, I think we've been doing a number of things. So MOE has got the Meals in Schools program for those students who are on financial assistance schemes. MOH has got the Meals on Wheels programs for seniors with limited mobility. But I think that's not all. We recognize the point that we need to get the whole ecosystem, which is one of the recommendations by the researchers. I think that's a great point to actually be labeled, because we need everyone to come together. Government agencies, it's not just MSF, we've got to bring all the partners on board. We've got to bring all the community partners. Food Bank is one such great community partner, which is why in 2019, we started the Charity Food Work Group. And we're very happy to have Nicole on board as one of the key founding members in this work group. What do we do in the work group? We share best practices. We actually do, in 2020 was exactly when a lot of groundwork was done to really help those who are at risk and in need within the family. So we have seen a lot of good things come out of that. But I think one key takeaway from all this data that we have all gleaned from different parts of the food ecosystem is that today is not just about giving alone, but it's also about giving right. What do we mean by giving right? It's also, giving right means giving in a dignified way, such that the beneficiary doesn't have to just always wait at the same time, at the same place for that small package, that package that comes to them, and you get a standard pack of rations, which some of them they might not like or might not be able to consume. So for instance, a diabetic patient, if you give him a pack of white rice, it's going to be a white elephant, right? If you have households with small children, the dietary needs are going to be quite different from a household full of seniors, right? So how much they need, what they need, when they need it. I think these are ways in which you can tweak giving in order to give in a much more dignified and much more coordinated way. And this last point about coordination, I think is key for various partners to come together. So, which is why in last month actually, we have soft launch Food Connect directory and database, where we seek to bring together various community partners like Food Bank, as well as other food charities in the ecosystem, so that we can sort of connect the data, connect the dots. Because what is happening out there today is that the service levels across different towns in Singapore is a little bit uneven. Some communities get somewhat overserved, some communities get somewhat underserved. And those who fall through the cracks, I mean, we want to be able to pick them up and also give them a chance at being food secure as well. So I think coordination is key, which is why I think events such as this is great, because it brings together like-minded, passionate individuals and organizations, researchers, practitioners on the ground, policy makers. And I think we should have more of these sessions in future. If Nicole would have us in this very swanky space in this part of the world.
The space is always available. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, thank you. Come. Okay, maybe before I hand over the mic to Edward, because I want to tap his minds and experience over the last couple of years, I just wanted to mention a few things as well. Interestingly, I think Eric shared a lot of stuff on the ground, what's happening. And I must say that actually the government agencies have always been aware about some of the gaps. So one of the gaps that I personally see is that there's a shortage of social workers. Yeah, sometimes underpaid, overworked. And, I think with the sudden upsurge, of the needs on the ground as well. So I think, NUS and the various schools are struggling very hard to push out as many social workers as possible. And I say that for sure because I also sit on the Medifund board of Ntuc. And I can see, the in-depth and the heart and soul that these social workers actually deliver to all the patients and the clients that they actually serve, actually with dignity and respect as well. So it's very interesting. So that's one. And then the second thing is that I actually had a very candid conversation with MTI last week. I said the cost of goods, lending in Singapore, and I think we have some business people sitting amongst us, commodity is exceptionally expensive, utilities as well. So now this brings me to the point, and this is a responsibility of any NGOs or anybody like the food bank, for example, where we are the custodians of the cash and the donations that comes in. Every single dollar to be spent for a worthy cause, and we should be minimizing duplication, which is why connection and understanding the ground is so important. So if any of you wants to do any food bundles, food drives or whatever, please don't just volunteer any block. Try to reach out to us. You know, if it's not under us, we'll direct you to the right NGO that these are the areas that actually needs help. So please don't overfeed or overgive certain areas which are overly served. Okay, so now over to Edward. I think interestingly, we've been working very closely with Edward on many other things. So, but one of the projects that actually took me by surprise was when we launched the vending machine at Senja. You know, the people there, some of the elderly, right, they actually embrace technology so well, so much so that as we are topping up the machines, they're already queuing up there waiting. What's the next thing? Maybe we have gamified it, but for any one of you who have never seen the vending machines that we've rolled out, it's actually over there. We've got cooked food and the food pantry as well. But Edward, anything to add actually from your observations? Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to really congratulate Nicole and her team for a wonderful 10-year anniversary of Food Bank. Round of applause for Nicole and her team, 10-year anniversary. Thank you. And really thank you for your partnership at where I serve at Zhenghua. I know really you have been blessing our residents for more than a year. I think Eric has shared a lot about what the government does. And I think as a member of parliament, or MP on the ground, I echo some of his points that, first of all, I think we need to take a very resident-centric approach. And for a resident, we first also need to recognize that every family have very unique circumstances. I think Nicole's first question about what does the government do? What more can the government do? In fact, sometimes the challenge is not what the government is doing, but perhaps the government is doing so much for the family, they are having a really tough time navigating where to go for help. If it's a medical issue, they need to see the medical social worker in the hospital. If it's a financial issues, who can they go to? So often an MP becomes I would say, the port of call, sometimes perhaps even a final port of call, and we will help a resident basically say, okay, what are your needs? And we send different appeal letters to different agencies. And Eric's point on Comlink is something which is really, I think, a real shift in the way we deliver help to families. Because first, it's about user empathy, it's about resident centricity, and says, borrowing a business term, because coming from business, about account servicing, right? For a family to have someone familiar with, I think earlier you said, the resident wanted to speak to James after James visited the resident a few times, because you build familiarity, the person who is on your doorstep becomes a friend. I think that's exceptionally important, because it's not just about familiarity, it's about trust. Sometimes for someone who's already vulnerable, they may have trust issues. And if you see someone every single time, the same face, you build trust, and then you start opening up. So the account servicing approach, building trust, understanding the unique needs of a family becomes so critical. And in fact, I feel that that's where the most heavy lifting happens, because you can't expedite trust building. It takes time, and it means boots on the ground, people on the ground, knocking on doors, understanding each family needs. And then taking the account servicing approach and then say, okay, where are the resources? How I help you navigate? And then deliver these needs in a very timely fashion. So that's my first point. And being an entrepreneur, instead of saying the word gaps, I prefer to say, where are the opportunities where we could then do better from a partnership point of view. Having worked with Nicole and her team for the past 1.5 years, I know quite a fair bit of the vending machines. It's actually a technological challenge as well. Nicole said that our seniors at Senja are very tech savvy. Yes, but how can we use technology to actually deliver needs in a more timely fashion? You spoke about the need for more social workers. I think, Nicole, you are a business owner. And for anyone who's in business here, everyone will tell me they have not enough manpower. Right? There is absolutely no sector in Singapore that can share that they have enough manpower. So clearly, we do have a manpower shortage across the board, not just in the social sector, but any business owners will say the same thing. So then The challenge now is that how can we reach out to what Eric said, to provide very bespoke solutions, but yet being able to empower the person at the door to be able to handle 50, 100 clients at the same time. And I think certain technology enhancements and important integration is necessary. Right? So I take the food bank as an example. I think you have now a version 2 card that really allows beneficiaries to exchange fresh food. And I'm quite sure some parts of the challenge was integrating the technology with the POS system of the particular vendor. And that discussion can take many months, in sometimes a circular fashion as well. As you probably know, one of the major things that the government has wrought in the past 1-2 years is something called the Cdc Vouchers. And I could share really from first-hand experience speaking to residents, the Cdc Vouchers has been an immense help to many of our residents. The first version of Cdc Voucher was actually a paper version, a physical voucher. And you could imagine already the logistical challenges of that. Firstly, a lot of resources goes to printing the vouchers, mailing out the vouchers. You can just imagine the carbon footprint in that. And then when the vouchers are being used at the merchant, the reimbursement process of reimbursing the merchant, it's also an extremely tedious process. Someone has to count these vouchers. So now the new version of Cdc Voucher is largely digital. It's mobile-based. It's simple. And each time when in my constituency, I ask the merchant, I say, how's the new Cdc Vouchers? How are residents using it? I say, yes. And I really ask the merchant, how is the experience? And one of the first key question I always ask the merchant is, how fast do you get your money? Because if it takes 1 week for a merchant to be reimbursed the funds, you could tell the merchant is not going to be very enthusiastic to accept these vouchers. So as we give vouchers, we also need to work double hard to ensure there is acceptance worldwide so that when we bless an individual, the redemption is convenient and easy. I think I was reading the report surveys and I was reflecting, why is an NTUC fair price voucher? I think in our pre-discussion, someone was also asking, why NTUC fair price voucher, not other types of vouchers? And I would say actually, again, taking the mindset of resident centricity, convenience is important. And I think NTUC, because of its network, provides the most convenient aspect. All right. And secondly, one of the things that also jumped out to me in the survey was 18% or 18.6% to be precise, are also now using the vouchers for non-food essential items. So again, a supermarket gives you the ability. But let me come back to CDC voucher and the point about technology integration and how partnership, and this is me speaking as an MP and what I hope can be done further, is that today the CDC vouchers actually can be used for a haircut. In fact, some beauty salons can also accept CDC vouchers. So it's very much a wellness program. If you want to go for a beauty or haircut, which is important, right? You could use the CDC vouchers. And I think the government, especially GovTech, has spent tremendous amount of resources to set up that digital system that does not need to be integrated with any POS. It's simple for a resident, it's simple for a merchant to jump on board. So where is the opportunity, right? Could we then work with the various partners in the ecosystem, instead of you creating your own voucher system, your own system for voucher redemption, can we then all ride upon the CDC system and reduce duplication in terms of the need to come up with all these technology systems? And then you create a lot more efficiency. And today we have SingPass. It's a national digital identity. If you want to be very specific to say a specific group gets more vouchers, I think it's possible because you can use a SingPass login and then you see the entire screen of the vouchers that you could have. So I see the opportunity in a very tangible way of how we can work with partners to ride upon the CDC voucher system and deliver more timely, more effective help. So that's one level of opportunity I thought to share. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Edward. Maybe just to chime in a little bit as well. From the early days when we started the food bank, we already took the stance that we're not here to compete with anybody. We're here to identify the opportunities that we can step in to fill certain things. So when we go to a temple, for example, that has tons of bihun during Vesak Day all the time, how can we come in to salvage all the excess bihun that they cannot consume anyway? Yeah, and then the other thing that we've been challenging ourselves, and I've been reminded the team very much, is that by right, our mission is to end food insecurity by 2025. So by right, they should be jobless by then. So we're one of those few charities that feel, honestly, that if there was any country in the world that could end food insecurity, Singapore would be it. And if we took on whatever MSF is doing together with all the technology that GovTech is also developing together collectively, I think there's a lot of changes that we can make. And another very big pillar of support that we will need, actually even from earlier days as well, but now even more than ever, whether in terms of ESG, sustainability, for example, and especially about doing good, right? I think corporates have a big part to play. So I would like to ask Priska, actually, from a corporate's perspective, how do you think you can actually help the ecosystem? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your question, Nicole, and we're very happy to be here today. Now, a little bit about Tolaram. We are a Singapore company, but we're also Africa's largest food manufacturing company, consumer goods company. So, food as a topic is very close to our hearts. Across the different geographies where we operate, all our businesses champion initiatives, to do with community development, education, as well as healthcare. So, we are very pleased to be able to support the efforts that we have going on here today. Now, why is it important for corporates to come on board? Apart from the obvious where, corporates can provide financial support, manpower support in terms of volunteering, I feel that a lot of other solutions also sit with corporates. Now, to Eric's point earlier, the thing about technology, I'm a firm believer that technology can go a huge way to solve world hunger and food insecurity. I think a lot of know-how in data management as well resides with the corporates, right? So how can we come together collectively as a group, to solve food insecurity and world hunger, right? The SDGs, we have this mission to end world hunger by 2030. And like Nicole said, if anyone can do it and make it go faster, that would be us here in Singapore. There are a lot of really smart people in the room here today. And I think collectively we can make a huge difference.
Thank you. Thank you, Priska.
Oh, you have one.
Okay. Yeah, I think also just to add on to Priska's point, right? The reason why the food bank started also was because what we observed from the business side. So Nicholas and I, right, in 2012, because we do a food distribution business, and we kind of saw that, oh my gosh, there's so much food waste, and all these are excellent food, that's pulled off the shelf, 4 months shelf life, 5 months shelf life, and yet they are being dumped. So sometimes some people ask, like, how come nobody really knows that Singapore has all these issues? Then I blame it sometimes on the government because Singapore is too efficient. I have actually challenged the NEA before. I said, can you just stop cleaning the streets for 2 days? Then I said, you go and see if anybody's going to throw their own rubbish or think twice about food wastage reduction, for example, because we're simply too efficient, whether is it housing people, identifying the needs, and especially like cleaning up the streets. So the problem is out of sight, out of mind. Okay, and I think it takes all the NGOs who are scouring the ground, right, to give reflection as well and to work together with all the various agencies. And coming back to corporates, so we started, in 2012, we went to all the major supermarkets because there was no donation plan. Actually, my neighbor over there, very, very good partner, but the initial feedback from FNN was, I have a dumping policy, I don't have a donation policy. But now every month they donate something because I think we kind of brainwashed their mindset and the market was ready to accept. So a lot of the things that the food bank has done over the last 10 years was literally to be the pilot, to be the guinea pig, to see if other people, we can encourage other people, NGOs, corporates, for example, to also lead the way in breaking through, in trying different ideas. Okay, so that was one. So I wanted to go back to Tanya on a very personal note. She was in the pioneering team when we first approached the Lian Center. And although now she has moved on to SUSS already from a lecturing perspective, I just wanted to find out, what does this project mean so much to you?
Well, it's definitely very close to my heart, Nicole. In fact, when you approached us in 2019 that you wanted to do the study, I know I was helming it at that time. I actually was very unaware of the side of Singapore, right? So for me, it was a very sobering and humbling experience to be a part of the study, to be a part of part one. And because of my career choices, I moved on to SUSS. And I then continued to express my desire to be associated with any iterations of the study that were to take place. And I told Dalvin, I told you that I would like to continue working. And I think it's the serendipity of the fact that I had worked on the first report. And then at that time was also the time when I had started my personal volunteering journey. And it was during my personal volunteering journey that I came across a number of families who were grappling with food, having their food needs met. And then it was too up close and personal for me to look away from. And that's when I think I expressed my desire, and I think you all showed confidence in my ability to contribute to the project. And here I am, and just very humbled. And I think it just validates my personal choices of wanting to be using research as a tool to really effect change. So I always feel that it's easy for me to say that the government should do this, the NGOs should do this, but what can I do? So I always ask myself that question. And I think the only answer that I find to that question is that go out, people to people contact, try and meet someone who you might identify as a family or as a person who you'd like to befriend, who you'd like to help. And that's what I'm trying to do in my volunteering journey. And of course, the platform that the research arena provides me is really to bring the voices of these people out in the open. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I continue to work in this space.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you.
When did you come to Singapore again, Tanya?
Sorry?
When did you come to Singapore
I
again?
came to Singapore. Okay, a little bit about that. I
Yeah.
came to Singapore in 2005. I'm a naturalized Singaporean, and I say with the utmost pride that I can sing Majalah Singapura as well as the Indian national anthem with the same gusto and the same enthusiasm. So yeah, I am. We made Singapore home, and that's why I feel that I want to be able to contribute to the more vulnerable sections of the society in
Thank you,
whichever
Tanya.
little way I can.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. I think I wanted to ask her not because I am busybody to ask, about her background, because I know that she decided to make Singapore her home. And amongst us, I think a lot of you seated here today may not be Singaporeans either. So I wanted to just mention, maybe that's my own point of view, that we're all global citizens. And I think we can't ignore the fact that Singapore is already in a very much better place, very much better placed to get rid of some of the gaps and the problems that we have in our system, because we're small, we're affluent, we have the ability, we're well run, for example, and well managed, and plenty of great NGOs and big corporates here as well. But I just wanted to leave a reminder for everyone as well that, maybe from Singapore's perspective, moving on post-2022, while we are serving the people on the ground, we might also need to look outwards to see if we are able to help the regional partners as well. So we've been having large, high-level talks with some of the bigger corporates, right? The commodity traders, for example, to see if there are any case studies or any projects in Singapore that can be also duplicated across to other countries, our neighboring partners as well. It gives me pride to actually mention as well that last year, I registered the Food Bank Asia Limited. So the idea really was that I think Singapore has a lot more excess foods that we'll be able to redistribute to our neighboring partners. Yeah, and so we have actually gone regional as well, because I think with the floods in Malaysia, for example, and with the different crises and natural crises in different parts of the world, we have decided to step up on our act and run ahead in supporting the region. So which may also include possibly figuring out hunger statistics in those countries, because some of them don't even have a hunger report. Okay, so now back to Delvin. It was the Lian Center's very initial report in 2015. If you haven't seen, you should go online and Google, okay, the full report is there on the Poverty Handbook. And they had many silos from shelter, medical help and everything. It was, for the first time, an eye-opener for many people. And actually, it took a very candid look at the entire state of affairs that was in Singapore. So when we read that report in 2015, that got the Food Bank inspired to deep dive into the food pillar. So maybe, Delvin, can you share, as your role as an academic and from Lian Center's point of view as well, what are the roles that you think, the schools should be playing also?
So the Lian Center for Social Innovation seeks to be a thought leader and catalyst for social change. So not only in Singapore, but in Asia and beyond. So as a researcher in LCSI, I see myself as an enabler of that. How? We do research, we have our rigorous scientific methods, but what we do is to break down technical information into digestible bites, right? And it's really to be inclusive to a non-scientific audience. So the individual, the Singaporean on the street, to corporates, to policymakers who may not have access to scientific journals. Why? Because we want to create awareness of the issues on the ground. And really, it's tied back to Maya Angelou's quote, right? So if you can do better, no, sorry, what was the quote? Do the best you can. And when you know better, you can do better, right? So by sharing information and knowledge, what we do is that we hope to inspire the average Singaporean, the individual, the corporate, the policymaker to take action, to make an impact, however small it may be, on the issues on the ground. So really, it's about knowledge sharing.
Thank you, Delvin. Yeah, so we've been great partners, and we've had a lot of candid banter between the team. You know, how should the report be structured, for example? You know, and I think it's a very interesting situation, right, where everybody has their different professional opinions on how the report should be crafted. But we've taken a lot of their views, and went with their way, because we also said that it's not just the food bank's view, right, or what we think should be written in the report. And so whatever that you're seeing, right, it's actually a very real or raw kind of statistics. It wasn't like tweaked by the food bank, for example, that because I want the statistics out. Okay, so now if anybody has any questions, we'll be happy to take them. Any questions from the ground? No? Okay, so I think one of the issues that I wanted to raise, and anybody can take this, right? With the looming crisis in Ukraine, right? I think it has brought home very dearly about whether is it that how are we going to be impacted as a tiny red dot? And one of the things which is interesting is that actually food security is a very big pillar of Singapore's national security. So, I mean, any comments on how we should be, educating some of the folks on the ground, or maybe, so one of the things that I feel that's currently lacking is that it's not that there's not enough help. So there are tons of vouchers that are being given out. But sometimes the actual people on the ground don't actually have the knowledge on budgeting. So are there any services, Eric, that's like, to teach them how to manage their money? Is there such a...
Well, first of all, I wouldn't describe the crisis as looming. To me, it's already a full-blown
Yeah.
crisis in that part of the world. So I think what we have seen along with that crisis is also the disruption of supply chains. Of course, the Brent crude prices have gone up. What it means in Singapore is that, for many of us, we have seen, food prices on our shelves and many other items in our daily living, prices have gone up. So for those amongst us who are amongst the lower socioeconomic status segments of society, they would find these changes probably the most hard to deal with. They will be disproportionately affected by these prices. So what are we doing about it? I mean, if I may just ask, right, because most people would then ask, oh, what is the government then doing about it? So I might as well answer the question. So we are trying to diversify our food sources, right? And in fact, we have started that as a result of COVID as well. Because of COVID, supply chains have already been disrupted. So some points we have seen some particular items on our supermarket shelves shooting up for no reason during COVID, because of border closures, because of safe management measures and things like that. So we learned from that lesson. Food diversification is going on. I mean, food source diversification is going on. That might bring about a more stable suite of prices that we deal with in the longer run, right? But in the short term, it's inevitable that we feel some of the stress or some of the strain on our overall purse strings, especially for the low-income family. In the longer haul, what the government is trying to do is also to work on helping our lower-income families try to cope with some of these challenges. And I think we have heard many of these discussions and debates going on in Parliament. Things like the progressive wage models going on from going onwards to more sectors of the economy, our lower wage workers, security, retail. These are some of the sectors that will be going on and applying the progressive wage model to. That's one. We have Skills Future. We also have a suite of other, workfare income supplement. So these are top-ups that will afford our low-income workers really the opportunity to also then have a dignified way of living. So these are all progressive or longer-term programs that we have to help our low-income workers. But I think it comes back then to what I mentioned earlier, also for the rental flat families, Comlink, where we get the community. It's not just the government doing some of these things in silo, because as I mentioned, what we want to do is really to get everyone on board, all hands on deck, to have community members, corporates where a lot of knowledge, researchers where you provide a lot of knowledge as well, systems in the corporates, for all these good things in society, for us to be able to bring them together. And government doesn't serve as the core or the big brother. Government serves as a facilitator in this entire process, an enabler in a way, or the policymakers for sure. So I think I see the role of government evolving in that sense, right? So to me personally, it's no longer the big government ways of the 80s or 90s, but today is very collaborative way of working with different partners in the ecosystem. I think many of us in this room today, potential partners that we want to recruit and work with as well. As Dalvin and Tanya was talking, I was thinking I'm going to ask them whether they'd be keen to become Comlink volunteers and befriend us. So I think these are the way forward, and I think there's a lot of potential if we can really excite Singaporeans, different parts of our ecosystem to come together.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
So just to add on to Eric's and Nicole's question, I think in terms, first of all, price transparency, giving the ability and tool for the individual to make more discernment choices is actually important. So today, actually CASE, Consumer Association of Singapore, actually has this app called the Price Kaki app. If you have not downloaded it, I would encourage you to download it, because it was in anticipation of rises of commodity prices that we felt that we need to empower every single individual to be able to compare prices. Right? So that's the first part, to empower the individual with information to do comparisons. But of course, we are in a global inflation environment. I think inflation is already hitting us even before the war in Ukraine. As Eric said, MTI has been diversifying food sources quite rapidly in the last few years. Eric mentioned about PWM, progressive wage model. I think it's really essential. And the government has, in the last 2 years, made a very concerted, I feel, speaking as an MP, we need to double down, we need to quicken the pace of PWM implementation to urgently uplift our lower wage workers. Because from economic terms, when you have inflation, in fact, actually our inflation numbers have moderated. I think MTI just announced core inflation in February is tapered down to about 2.2%. Maybe just a sidetrack a bit, we have been gotten accustomed to very low inflation since, I guess, the Lehman crisis. But 2.2%, if you look at it from an economic point of view, is actually quite normal. But 2.2% to a lower wage worker is still 2.2%. So the urgent need right now is to work on PWM implementation, urgently lift lower wage workers, because we need essentially real income gains. Wages has to go up faster than inflation, right? And that's why PWM is in place. One thing which we just announced, which is actually beyond PWM, is actually the local qualifying salary. So bosses, employers would know, the ability to hire a foreigner, you need to have local quota. But what MOM has now shifted is that every local worker must be paid a minimum of at least $1,400. If not, you can't have the ability to hire foreigners. So that effectively means that LQS is a broad-based, PWS tend to be sectoral, but now LQS criteria is clear. Every local worker must be paid at least $1,400. Then the employer has the ability to hire a foreigner. So that creates a very, very rapid scale-wide lifting of low-wage workers' salaries. Eric spoke about skills future. It's absolutely essential. And I'll go back to resident centricity. I think really thanks to partners like Food Bank, you address a short-term need, basic short-term need, which is essential because one needs to feel secure of my short-term needs. But the medium to long term, really, as what we said, we have to rapidly create real income gains for at least our resource-low families. And being in business, you will know that actually businesses are being disrupted all the time. The world is changing so fast. It then means urgently requiring for resource-low family members to urgently update their skill sets as well. If you talk about opportunities or even perhaps gap from an employment landscape, there is a huge mismatch. Bosses says, I would like to hire, I have job vacancies, but can't find enough job seekers. And clearly there's a major skills mismatch, which is why we have been putting in so much effort in skills future. But when I speak to my residents, they don't even have the bandwidth to go and attend courses because they are dealing with pressing immediate term issues. So while we need to quickly tighten up comlink and collaboration to address these basic needs, we must not forget that there has to be a medium and long-term plan for our families as well, and walk through the journey with them. Address the basic needs, but says, hey, actually, can I also recommend you to Ntuc E2I, for example, help you look for job matching, place and train programs, so that you start getting back into work, picking up skill sets that it's going to help you be more resilient for a fast, dynamic, changing world. So we can't just speak about social issues without the economic lens, because it's social and economics intersects all the time. And the government is also working really hard on the economic front to uplift wages. Because like what Eric mentioned, food is a symptomatic issue. The basic is really to understand that actually if you lift wages, generally, we lift people out of a P20, the bottom 20, then many of these symptomatic issues will slowly fade away. Yeah.
Thank you. Sure.
So that's what happens when you have two politicians hogging the mic. Just want to make a minor point about PWMs. I think PWMs are actually closer to each of us than one might think. I'll give an example from the security sector. So from what people in that sector has been telling me, I mean, it's why it's been difficult to increase wages of our security guards, you can put it that way, security officers, is also that of a demand issue. So for instance, some of us live in condominiums, right? And in the condominiums, most of the time there'll be a security guard who's sitting at the guard post, right? And when the MCST throws our tender for security officers for the condo, oftentimes very simple. Also, maybe it's a government thing. Everything goes by the government, and that is we use the lowest code approach. And then when the pitch is made for, why don't we give you more highly skilled, security officers who are trained in responding to terror attacks, blah blah blah, and whole suite who are trained also in first aid and can know how to perform CPR and use an AED, for instance, so that they can also be useful during emergencies. Then oftentimes the reaction would be, oh, no need. So long as the guard can help me press the button, leave my barrier, my car can come in, can already. So that's also, I mean, to cut it and put it very bluntly, that's also part of the problem in that we, place such a premium on, low price. But I think I just want to put it out there, food for thought. I don't expect any reaction or response. That these are part of the problems in, actualizing some of the gains that can be made in PWMs. And I think I just want to put it out there for everyone's consideration, because I think PWM is actually something that actually a large part of society can be a part of just to make that shift. But of course, that might translate into tangibly somewhat higher costs in some of the services that we consume. But I think in order to make sure that we can progress as one society, I think that those are, worthy considerations to have in our minds. Just food for thought.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think we've got a question.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much to the Food Bank and for the panelists as well for the insightful discussion. So I'm from Ish Tolaram Foundation. We're the philanthropic organization affiliated with Tolaram. So I had a question relating to something that Nicole brought up, and I think Dalvin and Tanya talked a bit about this as well, which is, that out of sight, out of mind phenomena we have in Singapore. So, In the social sector, I think if you were to have read the initial hunger report, it would not have necessarily come as a surprise. But when I shared it with, within my network, with friends, with family, outside of the social sector, it really blew their minds. And I think, we talked a bit about how, first, an issue as complex as food insecurity, it really takes a whole society effort and an ecosystem approach to tackling the problem. And not just food insecurity, but, those larger underlying issues as well. And there's a tendency to think that, the government has it covered, the social sector has it covered, but really it is a whole society problem and it's a responsibility of the whole society as well. So, but when you talk to people from, affluent nations, whether it's, the UK or, even Hong Kong, the general awareness of the population on social issues, they would tell you that there are social issues. But sometimes when you talk to the average Singaporean, they have no idea what some of those issues actually look like. Unless they've seen it on a day-to-day themselves, whether in work or with peers or themselves have faced them, it really is very out of sight, out of mind. And so my question really is, and I'd love to hear from Eric and Edwin as well as LCSI, how can we begin changing that narrative, right? And having that shift in consciousness, as well as, enabling the general population, one, to really have that awareness and understanding that there are these issues in Singapore. And then, the next step is then how can they get involved? Because it's not that they're ignoring the issues. It's really that the awareness sometimes is just not there, whether it's corporates or your individuals, right? So yeah, that's my question really for the panel.
Wow, nice question. So if I may say something, I'll start the ball rolling. I think firstly, to be fair and to be candid, right, to the government agencies as well. I think now versus 10 years ago, there's less stigma, there's less shame for people to step up. So I think even frequency with the media now, using the word poverty, for example, is no longer as taboo as 20 years ago, right? That's number one. I think secondly, it's important for us as a nation to realize that there is no shame in saying that there are indeed such pockets of people that resides amongst us. Thirdly, being a mom to my kids and all that, one thing that I also see is that we've been too comfortable in Singapore's context, where not just NGOs and not just the underprivileged. We've been helped on too many layers and too many things, so much so that sometimes things that are automatic to maybe someone in the Philippines living in the slums when they have to make ends meet, for example, or work on scraps, for example, to feed themselves. That sense of resilience is lacking in some of us. So sometimes it's like, first time we have a problem, the first thing is like, how? So I think it's important. And that's why actually I wanted to ask Priska as well for her, her views. It's like corporates, right? I mean, she doesn't have to answer anymore. Okay, so she's safe. So yeah, correct. So I just wanted to mention that maybe companies, from a HR's perspective, have a big role to play, especially those of us who hire huge pools of people. Like for my own company, 70 to 80% are all blue-collar workers. They likely with the salary that we give them, they're a little bit better off than some others. But the honest truth is that they struggle with daily issues, and they probably can even become a beneficiary of the food bank due to a myriad of issues, right? So I think one of the things also is that, if I may just mention, I feel that the means testing in Singapore can be very complicated, and where to get help, although there's so much help that's being given, can also be very complicated. Yeah, so, but I think the out of sight, out of mind, it's also not about, I'm not a believer, and which is why you see in all our campaigns from Food Bank's perspective, there is no weepy stories or we do not want to like highlight the individual, like, oh, thank you for helping, this person has been starving for how many, we don't do that. But instead, we try to highlight the light-hearted moments or the positive aspects of, like, if we give someone some nutrition, literally the kid can go to school without worrying, for example, but put it in a much lighter note. So I think through the past many years, most NGOs might have adopted the mentality that they always put sob stories, right? Yeah, we don't want to name names, but I think that kind of media or marketing coverage, just to put these things in the forefront, also doesn't quite work in today's world. But any comments from the academic point of view? You can also put a wish list, we've got MSF here today, like how to make your life easier.
I think I speak for Tanya and myself. From a research point of view, what we really want to do is to share knowledge. And with the knowledge that we share, we can ensure that, the information that we are putting out there is backed by rigorous methods, right? So any statistics that we put out there, you can be rest assured that the way we derive these statistics are from very calculated and reviewed way of collecting data, right? So for research, I think our role really is to share information, break down really technical information that people might not want to read in a scientific journal. Break it down for the average Singaporean. Let them know what kind of actions, little actions that you can take on a daily basis to make an impact and inspire change.
Yeah. So maybe if I may add before I also draw back inspiration to 10 years ago when we first started the food bank, right? There were no corporates who wanted to support us at all. It was very difficult. We say we went to the huge supermarkets, which I will not name names, but say, I don't donate stuff. It's more expensive to donate. But so we took the other route. We started working with HR, CSR, and we found out that actually working with team members, when we encouraged them to come for volunteering, it gave us an opportunity to educate, to brainwash, and to change the mindset. And subsequently, there's been a lot of volunteers, a lot of people, even like we have the juniors club, right? Starting from 5 years old onwards. Basically, we are able to plant the seed in them from a young age. So we've been doing a lot of talks, a lot of corporate talks. We present in schools all the time. Our schedules are very full. I think a lot of the NGOs also have a role to play where advocacy in today's world is even more important if you are a trusted voice. And all NGOs have a voice. So we should make use of that voice and spend the time to spread the word of advocacy. So I usually tell everybody, it doesn't matter if I'm just sharing my story with one person, because that I have already changed this person's mindset about the real issues that we're struggling on the ground. So therefore, for corporates, we don't see them just as someone who gives money. There's really a learning for all the corporates as well who volunteers with us. There would be some tangible takeaways. Yeah. Edward, anything you want to add?
I just add
Yeah,
one
sure,
thing. Yeah.
sure.
So just to your point about creating more awareness, I think we all need to take, or everybody sitting in this room need to leverage our positions as academicians, as corporates, as government, as NGOs to create that awareness. So if I know about something that needs the attention of the larger public, what can I do in my capacity to bring that information forward, right? So that's what we need to do. We need to actively seek community initiatives. There's lots happening in Singapore. Trust you me, there's lots happening. There's a lot of movements out there that are trying to bring issues like sustainability, food insecurity into the national narrative, right? But you have to actively seek that information, because otherwise it just gets drowned under the tall buildings and the beautiful roads that we ride our cars on, right? So I think it has to take a certain degree of, it takes a certain degree of personal initiative, which you just talked about, that we need to go out and spread the word about what needs to be done or what can be done, right? So I think that's my opinion about it. Thanks.
So great. We have a question on LinkedIn. Basically, John was asking if are there any ongoing initiatives to identify the families and individuals facing food insecurity and making this information to donor organizations, like improve the efficiency, which I think is what the ComCare and the ComLink and some of the ComConnect that is. Yeah.
Maybe I'll address the previous
Sure.
question first. So I think you shared about some comparisons to other countries, like I think the UK and Hong Kong. I think first and foremost, we do need to recognize that there is differences in magnitude of issues. Singapore, I think we have really made a lot tremendous progress in narrowing our Gini coefficient. So the magnitude of resource low families compared to many other countries is actually quite different. So the magnitude would also have impact of awareness, because obviously if the problem is much bigger, then it's a bit more visible and more aware. The good thing that we have going in Singapore is that the magnitude is really not as high as many other countries because of a lot of efforts in upskilling, and there's also a lot of government transfers via our progressive tax systems. So if you look at the real statistics of Gini coefficient, you will see it's much narrower compared to many other countries. That's one. But on the point about how can we have more Singaporeans or residents in Singapore aware about these issues, we must also I will also say, I will share the other dimension. In my interactions with Singaporeans, volunteers, corporate volunteers, you'll notice that Singaporeans are very time poor. I think there was a report a few days ago, I was just listening over the radio on CNN 938. Singaporeans don't have much sleep. We probably have one of the most sleep deprived nations in the world, and everybody is smiling because I guess maybe many of you are sleep deprived. You're not going to get probably not getting your 7 hours, and Nicole probably doesn't because she's such a superwoman. She's involved in so many things, and she looks so fresh. Maybe it's the pink hair. I think I need to dye my hair, right? So, but when you look at that from a macro perspective, firstly, magnitude, have some perspective to the magnitude of the issues, what we have been doing, and then of course, that Singaporeans are time poor. Then it's a bandwidth issues. Already there's so many things going on in the Singaporean's mind. How can we then create opportunities for interactions? I think we spoke a lot about data. I think data is important, but beyond the data, we talk about qualitative. I think the Hunger Report Part 2, the main difference, you go on deep dive, is qualitative. And part of the deep dive is really going to the ground, meeting the families. That's what Food Bank did during I think the circuit breaker, door-to-door, door visits, and you get a very different perspective of things on the ground. But we mentioned that is very time intensive, extremely time intensive. So if you have time poor nation versus things that really gives you perspective that's required, there's no substitute, which is very time intensive. How then do you draw that? How do you then create the opportunities? So what I could share as what we're doing on the ground is that our CDCs are now creating very short burst opportunities for corporates to latch on through the We Care program. So I've done quite a fair bit of giving, partnering with different organizations, but through that giving, we are also exposing many of the corporates to the living conditions of the resource-low families. Many of them probably have not seen how a rental flat looks like. And Nicole is quite right. In the same block of rental flats, you could see some with 2 plasma TVs, and then in the same block, you could see some with no furniture at all. So even within a rental block, there are many different things in perspective as you walk through the block. You see different archetypes, different demographics, some with children, some are seniors. But these are things that very hard to glean from a report. You have to walk the ground, right? So one of the things that I feel that we are doing, and we have to do more, is to create volunteer opportunities that is bite-sized, but yet still give very deep, immersive experience for people who are volunteering, and impactful experience for the beneficiary. More of these interactions that has to happen. And the challenge is really then, how do you manage different types of volunteers? What is a volunteer management system and program? So then we can create a lot more opportunities for Singaporeans who all want to do good, to be able to do good within the huge band of many other priorities they have in their lives. So that's where I think the opportunity lies.
I'm sorry to be doing this, always coming after Edward and adding on and never seemingly giving up the mic. I just want to address Nicole's concern earlier as well. You know, when you mentioned that this means testing, I recognize that sometimes it can feel like, oh, I must go from ministry A to Z, to get, so I must make 26 visits, to get all the 26 different kinds of support that I need. So through Comlink, I think we're trying to make that less onerous, because we understand the bandwidth tax that it imposes on families, when they could actually be more focused on doing things that they need to do, like securing good employment, taking care of child giving or caregiving needs within the family. We recognize that. That's why we are coming up with pilots of bundling the different schemes together. So for instance, if you're on ComCare today, what happens if you have children and youth who are schooling in MOE schools? Automatically, they will qualify for the financial assistance schemes. So that takes one application off the shoulders of the family. If you're on ComCare, you also automatically also qualify for SCFA. So that's the child care financial assistance scheme as well. So by and by, we will add more of these schemes. So once you have been means tested once, you sort of don't have to go through so many other times of the same procedures, the same forms, and the same questions that's being asked to you in an interview. So as to make it more focused for the families to really help themselves and be focused on doing the things that needs to be done. So that's one. That's the point I would address about means testing. To your point about the raising awareness, thank you very much for raising the questions. Yes, I think that we could do more in terms of raising awareness. But I think the good news is, for those folks who have come across the various volunteering opportunities, who have come across and seen for themselves what is happening on the ground. I would say this is probably a ballpark, but 8, 9 in 10 really step up and really become passionate givers to the entire system. And I think that's a testament of how, well, Singaporeans might not be the most articulate and expressive people in the world, but I think most Singaporeans have a heart of gold. And I think we want to tap on that. And thanks for also providing the perfect segue to my sales pitch for the MSF Cares Network, which essentially is a set of volunteering opportunities for all the various schemes that I've spoken about in Comlink, in the vulnerable in the community network, in peers, which actually care for all our housekeepers. So if you are keen, do take a look, go Google, right? Mr. Google knows everything nowadays. Search for MSF Cares Network. And if you're keen to also, volunteer for great partners, with sound methodology, great, passion and a big heart of gold, people like Nicole and Food Bank, please do so as well. It doesn't have to be a government volunteering opportunity that you have to go for, because there are also great community partners that are out there that we really, really appreciate and treasure. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. I think we have to do this panel a little bit more often. Huh? It does sound like, yes, sir. Yep, sure. Yeah.
First of all, I wasn't aware of any of this until my daughter spoke to me about it a couple of days ago and said I should come. So I'm grateful that I did come. I have two thoughts or suggestions possibly. One is that I said to her, more than the hunger report is a food security report that I sort of saw. But is there a way in the scope of the study that we do that we can actually put a number to, if 10% of the people are either undernourished or not getting enough food, that 10% of the people, if they were to be fully nourished and fully satiated, what would the dollar number be to arrive at that? What is the kind of ask and spend terms?
Yeah, so I can answer that question. So actually, yeah, because the initial steps, I was asking the Lian Center to give me that number, the magic number. So I think with the meals and the vouchers, I think we tried $150, right? Yeah, $150 to $300. Yeah, depending on the size of the household. So we'll be happy to, yes. Per month. Yeah, per month. And this will depend as well if the family is already getting some other help from elsewhere, or do they get food bundles already, for example. So the idea that the food bank really wanted to address, because we have this bank card system, right? So we really wanted to figure out every month, how much should I top up to help someone completely out of that means they don't have to worry about food anymore. They can worry about all the other bigger stuff. But if I top it up by, let's say, $300 in this card, does that actually elevate them out from the hunger issue? So that was the magic number that I was trying to get to. But I think that is maybe our hunger report 3. And I think it will be a very interesting deep dive on the back of what's happening around the world. Yes, Eric. Sure.
I think if we were to talk about dealing with the symptom of food insecurity, that might be the number that we're looking at. But if we are looking at a more deeper seated way of really eradicating the problems, the challenges that each family is facing, I think it will be much more than that. I think data collection in that sense is going to be much more difficult, because the solutioning for each of these families is going to be bespoke. Some will need employment assistance, some will need mental health assistance, some will need assistance in the area of family disputes, which will be hard to quantify and which will be hard to measure. So I think we are trying to go well, you can call it naive, a more altruistic approach by really looking at each family and then trying to solve what might be the root causes of why they are in the situation that they are in, through Comlink, through the various schemes that I talk about in the various programs. So I think don't think we will want to land on a particular number, but I think we want to present this as a journey. That this is a journey that we all have to take together, and we all stand a better chance of minimizing, reducing. I'm not sure we can get to zero. I hope we can. That's an ideal 2025 or 2030 according to SDG. But I think we should all work in that direction. And I think it's a all hands on deck approach. And once again, I want to emphasize that you know, we all have skin in the game.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. And I'm mindful of time, so we can take any further questions, you know, outside. And any one of you, lunch is also provided today at our supper club. But before I end, which is very important, so firstly, I have to thank all the panelists for joining us. Thank you so much. I think a lot of you must be wondering, so after the report is out, what is the food bank going to do about it? Now that we've identified the problems, right? And that's the big thing that we have to answer. So the biggest findings, just to recap again, and this is from our food bank's observation, that has been deeply helpful. Over the last 2 years, we've already started to customize our food bundles with a lot more personal hygiene products, which I think with the survey, that has ranked quite highly. So people actually want the shampoos, the soaps, the hand sanitizers, and all that as well, and even household cleaning items, which I think currently is still underserved. So I think there's not enough people maybe giving toilet paper even, for example. But for food, there's tons of food. So what we have done with our food bundles is that we have allowed for the NGOs that we work with, the family service centers, to curate their own bundles. So they say, hey, Nicole, this block is more elderly, they don't really cook. Can you give me like easy pull open cans, for example? And then say this elderly, the toilet paper cannot be so rough. So we take into things like that. But from our bundle program, which is a very simple program, it's about curating food bundles or essential bundles within a certain price range, like $25, for example. So through the bundles, we are able to implement healthier food products as well. So we've got all the Go Local bundles. We've been working with a lot of the farms as well. So we've got that. But what has been going up a lot is that a lot of people are asking for toothbrush and toothpaste. I don't know why, but that's that. Sanitary napkins, which is also expensive. Milk powder and diapers. But that's a complicated process because they want dedicated brands for dedicated households. And some babies are also like, you know, allergic to Huggies apparently. So it's a very bespoke kind of a thing. But we have been curating customized bundles, which that's one of the findings that we have from the survey. So we'll continue to customize all the food bundles and the essential bundles that we have. Then the second thing, which was very, very heartening from the food bank's team, is that through the last 1.5 years, we've also realized that a lot of people, they really want to feel respected. They want choices. They really want a choice. So with the establishment of the vending machines in 2019, October, during World Food Day, we also launched what we call the bank card system. This bank card basically has food credits inside, okay? And you are able to redeem dry rations and frozen meals from the vending machines. And then what happened was last year, we also rolled out a scheme where restaurants can also accept the bank cards. Because I think the social aspect of eating was lacking for the last 2 years. Everybody was locked up at home, right? So I think yesterday's announcement, like, wow, everybody was like so happy with this 10, you know? Yeah, and so we realized the social aspect. Even, you know, redeeming a cup of kopi, for example, in the morning for the elderly, they now are able to do it. So this year, we're hoping to onboard 1,000 F&B establishments all around the island. We've got the Facion Group and Subway on board already, with a spectrum of products, okay, breakfast items, you can be a pao or whatever, but to enable everybody who's able-bodied to be able to choose their meals, what they want to eat, when they want to eat. And it's always prepared a la minute. So I think what we have realized from the food bank side is that while, you know, MSF and the government agencies have worked very, very hard to change things on the ground, but you can simply see that there's a lack of manpower, no matter how well you digitize. 95% of the underprivileged that we see are actually able-bodied. So they actually don't need to be served meals. I am not saying that we'll be displacing the Meals on Wheels or Willing Hearts, for example. They still have a big role to play. But the idea that I'm mooting is that if we can move majority of the needs to be self-service, then all these Meals on Wheels program, together with MOH, for example, can be cooking customized and dedicated meals. soft food, diabetic meals, for heart patients, for example. There was one request actually for kids with allergies that's underserved. So currently they don't have a choice. The same packet of curry rice gets hung on the door every day, for example. So I think with this particular step that we're trying to take is to embody the people who are able-bodied, go down, choose your meal, and then you feel good about it as well. So slowly, what the food bank is trying to do is to create some independence in terms of choice for the underprivileged on the ground. But more importantly, we are looking at big data. And so what we want to do is, no matter whether it's our program, we've got 40,000 cards that we're going to distribute. The idea really is, even with this 40,000 data points, my two researchers don't have to go through people's Ntuc vouchers to actually get a deciphering. So we know that, oh no, a lot of people like to eat noodles. At what time? Are they consuming the right types of food? And back to Eric's comment as well, to change the entire landscape of the problem, one of the things we're hoping to address is the nutritional content. So if MOH wants to say that, hey, you should stop people from eating so much white rice, with the data, we are able to say that how we can encourage what they buy and all that kind of thing. Okay, and as we celebrate our 10th year this year, we've got some exciting news. So today is the first of many things that we're celebrating. So it's just to give you a snapshot, and all of you will be kept in touch, and we'll be making some stellar announcements as well. The calendar is over there. So today we have released our Hunger Report 2, which is a big step. Okay, we are going to do a fundraising for $12 million because we are really hoping to support 10,000 families. Yeah, 10,000 families for 1 year. Okay, and we're going to top up all these bank cards so that we can empower them to go out and choose their own food. So this is one big announcement that we wanted to make. Actually, in April, I wanted to embargo the news, but we'll share with you. We will be piloting the first ever cryptocurrency donation platform. We'll be accepting cryptocurrency as a form of donation, but don't get me wrong, I'm not in this crypto phase, you okay? I just feel that it's important to engage the youth 35 and below to jump on different causes. So we felt that using that as a platform, the NFTs, the cryptocurrency and all that, it would be a segue into sharing more news with the younger generation. Yeah. Okay, and then also to coincide with what MSF is already doing, we are also coming up with our own feeding directory, which is a very simple project. It's like a Google Maps where you key in the postal code and the nearest food aid will also pop up. So I think there's so much that we can collaborate with MSF and sharing information as well. Maybe whatever information that we have, we can also just populate over to them. Okay, but that's what's going to happen for the next couple of months, and we'll keep everybody engaged. But on behalf of the food bank team, we'd like to thank every one of you for joining us today. It's been an interesting session. And please feel free to approach the food bank team if you want a tour of space. And all of you are welcome to lunch as well at the supper club. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. So for everyone, for those who are having lunch with us, you can head up to level 6 using the lift. The lunch is ready at level 6. Thank you. Sorry, so for anyone who wants the tour of food bank or it's your first time here, please look for James or myself. And for lunch, you can look for Vidya at the back.